Welcome. This is the fourth tape in the series, Women and the Old Testament. The topic for this week is the women in Judges. And this tape is going to mostly be a background tape, giving you a sense of the book of Judges, how the book of Judges fits into the larger narrative of the Israelite people, and some other stuff that will relate to our topic of women in Judges. It's particularly important to look at women in Judges for reasons that we'll see shortly. Women have a unique opportunity during this period in the biblical narrative to act with a kind of freedom that they didn't have before and that they will not have afterwards. And we'll try to understand what it is about their unique circumstance. And this tape should serve as a good background for both the primary and the secondary reading for this part of the class. First, let's talk about the book of Judges in the context of the larger biblical narrative. Before Judges, we have the part of the Bible known as the Torah or the Pentateuch. And this part traces, we're starting with the book of Exodus and the story of the Israelite nation, and this part traces the Exodus event, the deliverance of the Israelites from Egyptian bondage, and what we might call the wilderness wandering, where the Israelites travel through the Sinai Peninsula for a period of 40 years. And then at the very end of, well, actually the entirety of the book of Deuteronomy, moving into the book of Joshua, we have the Israelites entering the land of promise, which at that point is known as Canaan. And we have an interesting literary phenomenon which takes place at this point, because we have, in fact, two distinct accounts that tell us about the processes by which the Israelites entered into the promised land. The first of these accounts is in the book of Joshua. And in the book of Joshua, the entrance of the Israelites into the promised land is described as a sudden conquest, a blitzkrieg. If I can draw a schematic map of Canaan on the board, Canaan is roughly a rectangle, the Mediterranean Sea over on this side, and the Israelites are described in the book of Joshua as going under the land, cutting it in the middle, and then conquering north and then conquering south. So it's a sudden, effective, complete conquest of the land. Then we move into the book of Judges, which is our primary concern this part of the class. And Judges creates a very different picture of the conquest. Instead of, as we see in Joshua, a conquest which is both swift and decisive, we have rather in the book of Judges a conquest that is, first of all, gradual, where the Israelites pick off various Canaanite cities one by one, and it's over the course of probably a few centuries, and it's also incomplete. That is, there are large blocks of territory within the land that are not conquered. So the book of Judges is about the gradual, if I can coin a word, Israelitization, the gradual transforming of the country into the nation of Israel. Now what we have here, and this is going to be significant for us in a few moments, is no king, no centralized leadership. Now we'll get back to this in a moment, but I want to speak now about just the general structure and makeup, how the book of Judges was put together. The book of Judges is made up of a number of discrete and separate folk stories folk stories for the most part about the heroes in Israel. But these stories did not stay as separate and discrete stories. Rather, they were collected. And they were collected by a figure that I want to call, this is the common designation for this figure, the Deuteronomist. The Deuteronomist took older Israelite stories and he arranged them in a particular order to accomplish a particular theological purpose. And I think it would be helpful for us to not only know where Judges fits in the larger Israelite narrative, which I've just described, but also to see how the Deuteronomist chooses to use the stories. The Deuteronomist is writing at a much later period of time, hundreds of years later, and he has a particular theological purpose. For those of you who have taken Theology 205 with me and probably with other teachers as well, this is going to be a kind of review. For the rest of you, this will be new material. The Deuteronomist, at this point, is trying to demonstrate the importance of the Israelite process of centralization. Now, at this point in Israelite history, Israel is, as I said, decentralized. No centralized government, no centralized leadership. And the Deuteronomist is arranging these stories in such a way as to demonstrate that this particular form of government does not work. That this particular form of government is ineffective. And the way he does this is very subtle. It's not obvious. He doesn't preach at us and tell us in this place the kind of government he really wants to have. He rather arranges the stories in such a way as to demonstrate the increasing lack of functionality of the sort of government they had. I'll talk about their government, their style of leadership in a moment. And the way he does this is by arranging the stories in descending order of success. So early in Judges is 21 chapters long, and the earlier chapters of Judges depict successful leadership. And as we go through the book, we gradually get less and less successful leadership until we get to the very end of the book of Judges, which depicts a brutal and disastrous series of errors that take place in the country that almost bring the country to its knees. Nothing going on from the outside, no outside threat. We're just talking about internal collapse. And where we go from there, so let me lay out the narrative again so you see where we are. We start with Israel in Egypt at the beginning of the book of Exodus. Then, in Joshua and Judges, we have two conflicting ideas about how the Israelites moved into the land of Canaan. But in any case, what we have is Israel in Canaan. And where we're going afterwards, and I just wanted you to see Judges in context, where we're going afterwards is the story of the Israelite monarchy. So, the arguments here are that Israel is moving towards more and more centralization. Israel is moving towards the establishment of a strong centralized monarchy. We don't have the strong centralized monarchy here, but we're moving in that direction. But we're moving negatively. By that I mean we're seeing the collapse of the previous regime, and we're clearing the brush in a sense to prepare ourselves for this later coming of a entirely new political system. So, what kind of leadership does one see within the book of Judges. And in fact, we don't have one type of leadership, but in fact we have two distinct styles of leadership that work in a kind of parallel relationship. On one level, we have what I would call tribal leadership. This is a fairly primitive system of government that works when people are relatively isolated and decentralized. The tribal system of government works through a system of elders. And elders work on a number of different sociological levels. The most basic level of eldership is the level of the family. The family being the smallest and most basic social unit in ancient Israel, as well as in most primitive societies. Now, it's important that I mention here that when I say family, I do not mean what modern 20th century North Americans regard as the nuclear family, a father and a mother and a number of children. I mean something much more sweeping, much larger than that. Rather, a family would consist of mothers, fathers, children, grandfathers, grandmothers, in some cases great-grandfathers, great-grandmothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, and nephews, upwards of, really it could be somewhere between 70 to 120 people, all living together in the same basic family compound. So that's the social unit. When somebody in the family marrying outside the family in most cases, then if it's a man, the wife will be brought into the family and will in fact become a part of the family. And then their children will be born and will live in there, and so gradually the family unit could get larger and larger and larger, and at a certain point it will divide into probably 2 or 3 family units. The family unit is ruled by an elder. I don't know of any example in the Bible that describes how such an elder might be chosen. Rather, it could be the oldest male member of the family, and I suppose I need to stress here immediately that the elders are male. So it could be the oldest male member, but I could see a lot of problems arising from choices such as that. So more likely it would be the elder chosen most qualified by some kind of a consensus or some kind of a joint agreement, or perhaps the person recognized as most skillful politically, economically, militarily, depending on what was needed. If you ever saw the movie, Kevin Costner movie Dances with Wolves, the way the leadership arose from within the tribe when they needed a warrior, when they needed somebody who was skilled in military, they would choose that kind of a leader. When they needed a leader who was skilled in hunting, they would choose that kind of a leader. It could be by election, it could be by consensus, it could be the wealthiest or the most influential branch of the family, or it could be by means of the person who's been around longest and is the oldest. So we have the family unit, roughly 70 to 120 people, could be a little bit less, could be a little bit more, ruled by a single male elder. Now, as families either divide up or as one family intermarries with another family, there is a larger social unit which develops, which emerges, and that doesn't have any specific name within the Hebrew Bible, but probably the best thing we could align that with is what is commonly called a clan. And a clan is made up of numbers of various family units. And it appears that clans, too, have this kind of male eldership. So how would a clan elder be chosen? Once again, I do not know of any particular way that such an elder is chosen, but it could be some kind of a council of the various family elders that choose among themselves an elder that would be the most qualified, hopefully. It could be through some kind of combat or ordeal. So maybe the elders would fight, and whichever one wins would turn out to be the elder of the clan. It could be through some kind of consensus. It could be through some kind of election. But now we have a number of smaller social units, the family, combining together for military protection, for their own economic interests, or whatever. The purpose of this is to bring together a larger unit to promote the security of the group. So we have families, we have clans, and finally we see a number of different clans gathering together again for mutual interest. And this could be any number of clans. I don't see that this has any kind of a downward or an upward limit to it. But then we finally have the more commonly known unit of the tribe. And as you know, traditionally there are 12 tribes in Israel, although who those 12 tribes are and how they're designated, it's different all over the Hebrew Bible. There's no way to exactly nail that down. So the number 12 appears more to be a traditional designation than an actual historical designation for the organization. The ancient Israelites, they liked the number 12. So the tribes, too, would have elders running them. They're not specified. They're not, for the most part, identified as tribal elders. So once again, we really do not know exactly how they're chosen. So they could have been perhaps some kind of a council of clan elders that would choose among them the nature of a particular one of the elders to lead the tribe, or it could be done in any of the other ways that I mentioned. But here's the significant issue. It does not go beyond this level. There is no intertribal council. So we have 12 or so, we have 12 tribes, and these 12 tribes are in fact not organized. There is no national elder that holds together all of the tribes. There is no intertribal council that unifies the entire nation of Israel. So this brings us to a central question, which is what then is it that makes Israel a single nation and not just an accumulation of 12 or more tribes? There are only a few things that actually keep the various tribes together as a single national entity that we know of as Israel. First, I'll reiterate, we have no central tribal government. Just does not exist. There is no easy administrative way for all the Israelite tribes to act in concert. We just have individual systems of leadership, eldership, that function within the individual tribes which are located and identified regionally. No central tribal government. What I call the organization at this point is a loose tribal confederation. I like to compare it to the early organization of the 13 colonies in the early history of the United States, before the establishment of the Federal Constitution in 1789. From 1776, the beginning of the Revolution, to 1789, the individual colonies were autonomous. They did not have any accountability to some larger centralized government. Whatever centralized government there was relatively weak. It could not collect taxes. It could not conscript the military. It just it was a means for the individual tribes to do what they wanted. In fact, we see vestiges of this in the reference that various states have when they identify themselves as a commonwealth. Massachusetts is a commonwealth. Kentucky is called a commonwealth. And the notion there is that they still have some degree, some measure of autonomy. In the presidential primaries, frequently the states will introduce themselves. Mr. Chairman, the sovereign state of New Jersey casts its votes for whoever. So a sovereign state, it's not really a sovereign state, it's just a way to talk. That's a reflection of the time in the United States when the government was much less centrally located. So again, I'll ask the question, what actually is it that brings the tribes together, that makes them act not as 12 discrete and individual tribes, but rather as a single nation? There are three things that hold them together. The third one will be especially important for us in this class. The first one is they have a common tradition. And I understand the tradition as a narrative. All of the Israelites look back and see the story of the Exodus as their story. I'll give you, again, a contemporary example. My ancestors came to this country in the early part of the 20th century. But yet, when I went to school in this country, the story of George Washington, the story of the Revolutionary War, the story of the Civil War, that becomes part of my story. So I talk about my country and my story, even though my ancestors had nothing to do with those things. They didn't come over on the Mayflower. My ancestors didn't fight in the Revolutionary War. My ancestors didn't fight in the Civil War, and yet that becomes my story. In a similar way, the Israelite tribes, even though all of them probably did not experience the deliverance from Egyptian slavery, that all becomes part of their common tradition. They all tell those kinds of stories about themselves, likewise the stories of the ancestors. So there's a common shared tradition among the tribes. They regard themselves as all part of one primeval family, the family that starts with Abraham and continues on in the story of Moses. The second thing that holds all of the tribes together is the fact that they seem, and this is a bit more controversial, there'll be some people who will suggest that this in fact is not even true, but it works for us, and I think likely there was some kind of a common, and here I want to use the word carefully, cult. I want to be able to use this word. By cult, what I mean is a common shared public religious activities, such as sacrifice, such as common communal prayer, such as, and this brings me to the second thing, a common cult and shrine. Although the various tribes likely had their own shrines, so there would be a shrine for the tribe of Judah, there would be a shrine for the tribe of Issachar and Asher and so on, they seem to have one particular shrine that all the Israelites looked to as their shrine, and that was, at this point, located in southern Palestine in Shiloh, and it was connected with what we know of as the Ark of the Covenant. So this particular sacred wooden box, which the Israelites carried with them through the wilderness, brought into the land of promise, the land of Canaan. It was located in southern Palestine in the city of Shiloh, and all the Israelites from wherever they lived at certain times of the year would seek to make a pilgrimage to this shrine to honor Yahweh in his particular place. So they shared a common tradition and they shared a common cult. I said that the third issue of commonality will probably be most important for our purposes in this class, and that is the idea of a shared leadership. And I want to spend a good deal of time on this. The question we need to ask is, what happens in times of national disaster when tribes have to work in concert. They have to do things together. They have to organize. They have to coordinate. We've already said that there's no central tribal government. So they cannot bring something before a council, or they cannot bring something before a single high exalted chief elder or king. They do not have that kind of institutional power. So what happens when there's a regional crisis? What happens when a particular enemy is attacking, say, 3 or 4 tribes located in the northeastern regions of Palestine? How do the tribes respond? How do the tribes deal with an issue like this? And the way they deal is this form of informal tribal government, and I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it charismatic leadership. Charismatic comes from a Greek word charis, which means gift. And what this speaks of is particular gifted individuals who are appointed by God to lead the Israelites. They are not chosen from among the elders. They're a system of leadership that runs parallel to the system of eldership. The elders recognize and respect this form of leadership, even though it has nothing to do with their particular structures of authority. It's as if at times of national security or national crisis in security, the Congress and the President and the Supreme Court are all suspended, and some whole new leader arises to lead the people in times of crisis. Charismatic leadership means that the person is uniquely gifted by God to do this leadership. But of course, the problem that arises is, how does one recognize such a leader? And this is where it becomes important for issues of women in the Hebrew Bible. We have, as I said, these people are gifted to lead by Yahweh. That's the understanding. So the first qualification of these people is that they are chosen by Yahweh. Now, that's not something that anybody could prove. That's not something where somebody could bring some kind of a paper that Yahweh signs and says, this guy is chosen by me as a leader. So we don't have it that way. But we have somebody who at least claims to have some kind of an experience whereby they believe that Yahweh has chosen them to lead. The process continues. Not only are they chosen by Yahweh, but they are understood to be empowered by Yahweh. This is where the charism or the gift comes in. Yahweh doesn't only give them the authority to lead, but also gives them the power to lead. Now, this is expressed in some very specific technical language that we could see here. I'm just going to skip around and show you a few places where it happens. This is chapter 2 of Judges, I'll read verse 15 and 16. Whenever they marched out, this is speaking to Israel, Yahweh was against them to bring misfortune, as Yahweh had warned them and sworn to them, and they were in great distress. Here it comes. Then Yahweh raised up judges, and I'll talk about the term judges in a few moments, who delivered them out of the power of those who plundered them. I'll go on and give a specific example from chapter 3. This is chapter 3. I'll begin with verse 9. But when the Israelites cried out to Yahweh, Yahweh raised up a deliverer. So let's just look at those names for a moment. We have judges. Yahweh raised up judges for them, thereby the name of the book. And Yahweh raised up a deliverer for them. So this Yahweh raised up a deliverer for the Israelites, who delivered them, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. Then here's the important part for number 2. The Spirit of Yahweh came upon him. So this is a technical language for what I'm understanding as having been empowered by Yahweh. The Spirit of Yahweh came upon them. Or sometimes it says the Spirit of Yahweh possessed them, or the Spirit of Yahweh clothed them, or took them over. And of course, 1 and 2 are both intangibles. There's no way you could just point to that and prove that if you understood yourself as having that kind of authority. So the third element is absolutely essential, and it ties in a lot with what we mean in modern terms by the term charismatic, and that is they are acclaimed by the people. That there's some kind of a quality in these people that others recognize and want to follow. So the charismatic leaders, chosen by Yahweh, empowered by Yahweh, and whether that's true or not, whether you think that Yahweh really does things like that to individuals, what's important for us is that this quality is recognized by the people who are going to follow this leader. Now let's